we are going to make a self-binding 1-yard cuddle quilt. So this is a quilt that I made as a baby shower gift. Baby shower is actually tomorrow. This is 1 yard of minky, flat cuddle minky on the front, and luxe cuddle on the back. But this is a quick instant gratification kind of project that you don't have to quilt if you don't want to. So this is not quilted, but I do talk about how to quilt it and whatnot later on in the video. So the first thing I want to do is square up my cuddle. It's polyester, so you can't rip it. It's not like cotton where you want to, make a straight grain line. You can't rip it. So what I'm going to do is take and put my fingers between the 2 layers of the selvage and watch as I slide my fingers from one side to the other until that bubble is flat. You see that bubble is now flat? When I lay this down on the cutting surface, see my fold no longer puckers. It's just a nice even fold. See how off it is there? I'm going to take my straight fold now and I'm going to fold it in half. Okay, so since this is now straight, my fold is now straight, I can line this up on the sides like that. And it's a miracle because when you lay this down on your cutting surface, everything is going to be square. See how this is all nice and flat? So once you know that your fold part, this part is a 90-degree angle, now you can just kind of cut this to whatever size you want it to be. So it's a yard of fabric, so I'm going to leave it 36 one way and I'll probably cut it 45 the other way. So I'm using my longest ruler. If you're really worried about the size of how big you want the quilt to be, you can measure from this fold over and mark lines. Here's the edge of that. If you want to make sure that it lines up all the way, you can line up your fold over here. I've got it lined up, I've got the fold lined up on 17. And I'm just going to make a mark. Now when you're marking on Cuddle, a Sharpie kind of works the best because it's got that felt tip and it'll pick it up. Since I know that I'm not going to see this cut, I'm all right with marking in a Sharpie because I just want it to show up really well. If I line the end of my ruler up on the fold, you can't entirely see that. So what I prefer to do is line a solid line up with my fold so I can very clearly see that I'm on the fold all the way across. And then I'll line up the side of my ruler with the marks I just made. I'll come over and cut through all the layers. Okay, make sure you've got through all the layers before you pick this up. And I just let it hang off the side because then I can clearly see where my ruler's going to line up. Now, if I line the end of my ruler up mostly on the piece that's already cut and the rest of it on the part that still needs to be cut, I get a nice straight line. So I'm going to do just like I did. I'm going to line the edge of my ruler up with the fold that's at the top, and I'm going to make 2 lines. And we have the top part of our blanket is all ready to start. Okay, there we go. Now this is going to be the back of my blanket. This is called Cuddle Luxe, and what makes it luxe is that it's got a longer nap. This, I swear to you, feels like an Angora bunny. It is amazing. Now working with this, you're going to want to do things just slightly differently. Instead of cutting from the top of this, we're going to cut this from the back. The reason for that is the fluff gets a little bit harder to measure, but the backing of it is a nice tightly woven polyester scrim. So I've done the same thing where I've got a nice straight fold on my middle side here. Now, what I like to do to keep this from kind of wiggling around too much is I'm going to line up my ends where I'm going to cut off the least amount of fabric. I'm just going to kind of shake it down. Because this is thicker, you have to kind of make the fold happen on this. But as long as you have this side, you took that bubble out and you got this straight, then the other side is going to go straight too. I want this backing piece to be about 2 inches bigger than the top piece. So, and I want it 2 inches bigger on all 4 sides because I want to be able to wrap the back around to the front. Now, if I was going to quilt this, I would just quilt it and stop 2 inches, stop the quilting at the edge of the top, but I'm not going to quilt this. I'm just going to put this together and flip it. Okay, and I have a quilt. I can show you what it looks like where it's been quilted. This is a blanket. It's not going to be a quilt. So we're just going to lay everything out. Remember that our top piece was 36 inches wide. Okay, so that means that this piece, we had 18 on the fold for the front. Okay, this piece, we're going to cut it at 20. Since we probably don't have a table, most of us probably don't have a table big enough to lay out this entire blanket all at once. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and mark, and I want to give myself kind of a decent reference line. This is a felt tip friction pen, and I'm going to mark 2 inches on all 4 corners. I am now going to join these layers together. You can see where I made my 2 inch from the corner marks all the way on all the corners. I actually added a little bit of embroidery to this. So I've put my top piece of flat Cuddle, they're wrong sides together. So here's my monkeys on the top, my Lux is on the other side. I've marked my corners. There's a couple ways you can do this. You can pin this if you like. You can take and just with long pins, pin this down, and then you can top stitch around the corner. I want this to get done faster than that. So what I'm going to do is show you how to put this together with 505 spray. If it doesn't lay out exactly perfect, don't freak out. You're not going to notice it once it's done. Okay, so I'm going to take my 505 spray. This is a great use for this. I'm going to peel this back to the halfway point. I'm going to take my 505 spray, and I'm just going to mist this lightly on this one side. You want to try to not get the sticky out in the outside space. All right, so I'm back to my cutting table. I've got this all 505 sprayed down. We're going to miter these corners to make them easy to flip. For that, I really like to use my quick trim ruler. Because see this mark right here, this sort of upside down V? This lets me line up where I want to mark this to sew. Now normally, to use this ruler, if I was going to do this technique on cotton, I would go ahead and cut it and then match my sides up and piece them. Since Cuddle kind of creeps on you a little bit, sometimes it's better to just mark the sewing line. Okay, so here's my sewing line. We're not going to cut it yet. I'm going to fold these 2 sides together and put this together in the point. Just to make sure I've got my lines matched up right, I'm going to put my pin through my both layers of Cuddle and try to get that black seam, that black marking line, okay? So I'm going to line my outside edges up, and I just pin it a couple of times, just so that it doesn't creep on me too much, because when you move this to the machine, the weight of this will sometimes shift on you. And then I'm going to sew right on that diagonal line. Make sure you backstitch here and backstitch here. So I have all 4 corners sewn like this. So you have this weird sort of pocket over here, right? So here's my corner. I'm just going to take a pair of scissors, and I'm going to do about a 1/2 inch seam allowance on this one. Since there's so much fluff in this, you don't have to worry too much about it being a really tight seam allowance. You also don't have to worry too much about trimming away extra here. You know, normally we would trim away like that if we're making a bag or something. You don't really have to worry about that either, because it's such a big section and there's so much floof in it that when you turn it, so if you pinch it between your thumb and your middle finger, turn it right way out. Now you have this really great miter. Lay the blanket out on a largish flat surface. Get everything laying out where you want it, and then pin. And the way that I like to pin is I will pin from this way in. And the reason for that is because I'm going to sew right here. This way I don't have to pull the pins out. Okay? I try to get the corners exactly where I want them. They don't really move that much. And since you have the scrim underneath, you don't have to worry about it being folded under. You're just going to stitch this raw edge. All right, let's talk a couple of tips on the sewing section. We're sewing polyester. We want a polyester thread, not embroidery thread, but a polyester thread. This is a 60 weight Quilter Select thread. I also have polyester thread in my bobbin. Now the stitch that I like to use to do this, there's a couple stitches you can use. You can kind of do anything you want. You can just straight stitch it if you like. I prefer to use this serpentine stitch here. You can use that one. It makes this sort of wavy line. You can use this, is called a tape attaching stitch. So it's sort of like a really wide, really long zigzag, but it's also kind of blunted on the ends. You choose whichever one you want. You want to do a zigzag stitch, do a zigzag stitch. You want to do something decorative like this couching stitch, you can do that too. Using a walking foot with Cuddle is super helpful because you're talking about sort of slippery fabric. What a walking foot does is it moves the fabric on the top at the same pace as the feed dogs do. So it grips the fabric at the same pace in the top and the bottom. All right, so it doesn't, once you have this all positioned where you want it, it doesn't really matter where you start sewing. What you want to do though is line up the middle of your foot. Line up the middle with your foot with the edge of the fabric and the binding fabric and the top fabric. Do a tie-off stitch so that it locks into place. And then you're just going to sew all the way around so when you get to the corner seems a little weird, it's okay. So you just sew to this point, stop when you get in the corner. This is the beauty of Cuddle. It doesn't really matter where you stop. The fluffiness of the fabric is gonna hide any weirdness. As long as where you turn is on the fuzzy part of the fabric, just sew into the corner and then keep going. So we took it out of the machine. We're all done. We sewed all the way around. This is what your serpentine stitch looks like. That's it. That's how you do this. It is a piece of cake, easy to do. You can easily add embroidery to it on either the front or either on the back or on the front. If you'd rather make this into a quilt instead of just a blanket, easy enough. Put the Luxe Cuddle on the back, a piece of batting, put regular cotton or another piece of flat Cuddle on the front. I've done this with flannel before. I've even done this with a piece of satin. It just wraps around really nicely. And this feels like a baby bunny. It is so yummy. And that's all there is to it. Okay, so now we have our cozy, cuddly 1-yard blanket. It was a piece of cake, right? The kind of thing you could totally do with some kids, get it done in an afternoon, decorate it up any way that you like, make it your own thing. Make a bunch of blankets. Have fun. See you later.